Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the FantasyPros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Harris. With me, of course, is Kyle Yates. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at KyleYNFL. Yates, how you doing?
I'm doing good, buddy. It is good to chat with you. We were just talking before we started recording that you and I don't get to chat all the time, right? We're of course messaging all the time in Slack. But it's good to chat with you. And then also, I was on our guest podcast yesterday, so I didn't get to talk to, or don't talk to Pat much. But this week, I get my fix of talking to Pat here.
Way to be a spoiler.
I know.
As to who our guest is, and that's fine. And I listened to that podcast, and it was great. Our guest is the incomparable Pat Fitzmaurice over from footballgirl.com. You can find him on Twitter at Fitz_FF. Pat, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Dan. Great to finally get the chance to be on a podcast with you, and great to talk to Kyle after a whole 24 hours of not getting to speak to him. Really good to be on with him again. So can't wait for this, guys. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I did listen to that episode. It was a great episode. Everybody should check it out. You can find it on Pat's Twitter feed. At least that's where I saw it. But, we were talking a little bit before we started recording. Pat and I, we follow each other on Twitter. We interact a bit, but this is actually the first time we've ever talked. So it's great. I'm sorry that we had to bring on Yates to bring us down.
Wow.
But we'll figure out a way. And Yates, you should know that I have written into my contract no more than 3 podcasts per week with you. So that's one of the reasons why we don't talk that much. Okay, we got a great show for you today. We've got 2 Monday Night Football games. By the way, Can the NFL do this? I don't know what you guys thought about it, and maybe it's because I have a son who used to be a Patriots fan. The Patriots are now his 6th favorite team, according to his official rankings. The Chiefs are his 3rd favorite team. But if you could do this 7 o'clock game every Monday night for like the double header, because it really gets him to bed really easily because I can bribe him. He was like not listening, not getting in his PJs. I was like, I'll give you an extra 15 minutes of watching this Monday Night Football game all by yourself. And he was like, great. I just listened to it. I would love if they could do that. But anyway, we've got 2 games to break down. So that is fantastic. We're going to be talking trades, most traded players. We're going to do some buy low, sell high. We're going to talk rest of season rankings. And then we will answer your listener questions. Now, we are going to be talking about trade candidates, as I just said. So let's make sure I remind you about our trade analyzer over at My Playbook. You want to see whether or not a trade helps your team? The Trade Analyzer will do that for you. You want to view your power rankings before and after a trade? The Trade Analyzer does that for you. You want support for uneven trades? You want support for trading draft picks in Dynasty Leagues? The Trade Analyzer does that for you. It's over at My Playbook, along with a million other tools. That's fantasypros.com/myplaybook. Okay, let's get into the games. Chiefs 26, Patriots 10. Might have been the first time in my life that I felt bad for the Patriots because they legitimately look like they could have won that game. Certainly if Newton was playing, but even, maybe if they had just started Stidham. But let's start with the Patriots because they're a little more interesting. Obviously, no Cam here. Brian Hoyer starts. Brian Hoyer makes many mistakes. Jared Stidham comes in, throws a touchdown pass, 2 picks, one which was not at all his fault. But the running game is really the interesting thing here. We'll get into that in a second. But let me ask you, Pat, can you glean anything whatsoever from the passing game here? I mean, I assume Cam Newton is going to be out next week against Denver, then they've got a bye, but do you want to start anybody in this passing game, I guess, so long as Newton is out?
Boy, not really. We know the tight ends are completely uninvolved now. Even though we know it's a skinny passing tree with their receivers, it's basically just N'Keal Harry and Julian Edelman and Damiere Byrd at this point. Still just not enough passing volume with Cam out to be interested in any of these guys, and Edelman had such a weird kind of sleepwalking game for him last night with the drops and just just not sort of disconnected like he was used to the rhythm of Cam Newton, I guess, after a few weeks. And there's not really anything I want to invest in this passing game except for maybe James White and the little check down action, we saw him very involved with last night. So, until Cam is back, I think I'm staying away from these receivers.
And when Cam's back, you're good with Edelman, I assume, who I agree. He looked, I don't want to say this about a professional football player, but it's like he looked disinterested almost, he just wasn't as focused as he usually seems. You're starting Edelman, I assume, when Cam is back. Are you starting anybody else? We finally saw N'Keal Harry, used as the, red zone threat sort of in the end zone that we had hoped. But are you starting anybody else when Cam comes back?
I can't say no because we're about to hit the bye weeks and we've got this crazy wave of injuries. So entirely possible that N'Keal Harry could wind up in one of my lineups over the next few weeks in one of the leagues where I have him. And even Demir Bird is kind of interesting just because he is playing like almost every snap for the Patriots these days. So,
Yeah.
and I think he led them in targets last night. So,
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Pat.
oh, no, that's okay. Yeah. So Edelman is still going to be a starter most weeks if you've got him, I think. And Bird and Harry are interesting bye week injury fill-in options once Cam is back. But I think we're waiting on Cam, though, because the offense just didn't look potent enough last night with either Hoyer or Stidham.
Yeah, and Bird did see 10 targets last night, and he has been involved. But let's go to the running game. That's what really everybody kind of wants to know about. Sony Michel, kind of surprisingly, placed on IR. I mean, you have this thing where, of course, the IR now can be as few as 3 weeks, and you have them playing Denver next week, but then a bye, so it's sort of an easy way to probably manipulate the roster. On comes Damien Harris. Big game in his first game there, 17 carries, 100 yards. Yates, how do you feel about Harris here going forward?
Moving forward, I think you can look at him as a nice pickup this week. He moved into my RB1 spot as far as waiver wire pickups, but then I think that you can look at him as a RB3 next week. The thing is that once Cam comes back, that you lose the appeal with these running backs, right? Because you're going to see these guys involved, but yet their scoring upside just disappears because Cam is going to take away those rushing attempts. So looking at Harris, like him hitting 17 carries last week or yesterday, like I don't see that happening ever again. Just because I don't think that, unless it's next week with, Jarrett Stidham at quarterback, who's not taking away rushing attempts, if that makes sense. So moving forward, I think you can look at him as an RB3 next week, a solid option that you can plug in if you're in need. But otherwise, I'm kind of with Pat here that James White is probably the only one that I really want to be considering moving forward.
Yeah, so Rex Burkhead, of course, still got 11 carries. It's not as if Harris is going to run with the job, I don't think. And the goal line back, as we say often on New England, is Cam Newton. But let me ask you, Pat, because we did the waiver wire show yesterday without Yates. So this is the first time I'm hearing how Yates would have him. Now that we saw what Harris did, you've got some intriguing running back options given the Nick Chubb injury, given the Austin Eckler injury. Would Harris be your number one running back pickup this week?
I mean, almost by default, you would think yes, but to be honest, I almost think I would rather have Justin Jackson as a waiver wire pickup this week. Like, I'm worried Damien Harris is kind of a trap. So he had 17 carries, and he hits that 100-yard mark, that juicy 100-yard mark that people are going to be seeing, the nice round number that attracts everyone with fab bids. But he did that on 22 snaps, which is just kind of crazy. Like, if he was in there, he was getting the ball. And I mean, the Patriots used just basically the only game plan they could feasibly use when they were forced to start Brian Hoyer at quarterback against the Chiefs. They tried to take the air out of the ball, play keep away, run the clock, go with a complete ball control offense. So it was a really favorable setup for Harris. But Sony Michel comes back in a few weeks, probably. There are going to be games where James White and Rex Burkhead out-touch Harris. And as it was, those guys were still pretty prominently involved against the Chiefs. And then there's the matter, as Kyle said, of Cam Newton being a running quarterback and taking away some of those short yardage TD opportunities from his backs. So I could be wrong. Maybe Damien Harris becomes a thing, but my suspicion is that a lot of people are going to waste a lot of fab dollars this week on him.
Yeah, I mean, you sounded apologetic almost, Pat, for not having Harris as your number one running back pickup. He's not mine either, although he is in that just big group. For me, it's actually D'Ernest Johnson. He would be the guy who I would go after because I do think there's going to be more of a role for him going forward. But him and Harris and Jackson, they're all kind of right there anyway for me. Let's go to the Chiefs here. Nothing too noteworthy. The Pats played a really, really solid game on defense until they fell apart a little bit. At the end, Patrick Mahomes has 2, quote, passing touchdowns that he gets credit for with the drop. I feel like this is legitimately the same question every week. Pat, you see Mecole Hardman. He's really exciting when he touches the ball and he gets in the end zone here, but just 26 snaps. Is Hardman somebody that you think should be added to fantasy rosters?
I do. I like that he is clearly past Demarcus Robinson, at least on the depth chart. And John Daigle of Roto World had the perfect analogy for Hardman before the season. He referred to him as a straight flush draw in poker. Like, it doesn't amount to much at the moment, but you're like one card away from having a big hand. And I think he's still one card away, which would be some sort of injury to Tyreek or Kelsey or Watkins. But, we're seeing value now. This guy is a playmaker, and he has been cashing in on the limited opportunities he's been getting. So, yeah, I'm really interested in him as like a hold. I know a lot of the people in the leagues with shallow benches are not going to have the luxury of stashing guys in the next few weeks when the buys are hitting and they've got to deal with injured players. But if you have the room and can keep him around, I think it's well worth it.
So this is not somebody, just to be clear, you're not out there being like, yeah, I think Hardman's a guy who you can, for example, roll out there next week against Las Vegas, but he is somebody who you want to have on your bench, almost like a handcuff running back in sort of a sense like that, and you could hold him if so. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think in my rankings this week, he's at like wide receiver 48 or something. So you're still pretty much only squeezing him in an emergency. But like the value could definitely spike with just one injury away from being enormously valuable.
Yates, you echo that on Hardman?
Yeah, I wrote in a player note for this week for Mecole Hardman saying that he's a deep league flex option. Like, if you are in a 12, 14 team league and you have some pretty deep, starting rosters, then he's a perfect option to plug in as a flex because he does come with this like huge blow up potential. But then, he has really high highs and he has really low lows. So I'm not ready to trust him as anything more than that. But I do agree with Pat that he's a perfect hold in those normal leagues if you can afford it. That's the main thing. That if you can afford the space, and there's a very good possibility that with all these injuries and bye weeks coming up that you don't have that opportunity. But I think he's someone that you can absolutely hold if the situation is right.
Yeah, I think that's basically sums it up. It's hard, though, to hold guys at this point, given the bye weeks, given all the injuries. But if you can, certainly, there's a lot of upside. But, yeah, I'm not starting him anytime soon until there's an injury. But let's get to the more exciting game for at least you, Pat. Packers 30, Falcons 16. No Devontae Adams, completely irrelevant. 327 yards, 4 touchdown passes for Aaron Rodgers. 3 of them go to Robert Tonyan, 1 to Aaron Jones, who loses a lot of touches and snaps to Jamal Williams, so we can talk about that. But first, let's talk about Tonyan here, because Yates and I were talking about it a little bit right before we came on, at least on Messenger. So, Pat, what's your opinion here on Robert Tonyan? Probably out there in a lot of leagues, except if they were picked up for people who surprisingly lost Jonnu Smith or something this week. So what's your view on Tonyan long term?
I'm pretty excited about him, to be honest, and maybe more so than I should be, but I would almost be more enthusiastic about adding him than any of the running backs this week. Because even when Adams comes back, there is a big void here with Lazard out for up to 2 months.
Yep.
And I think Scantling is, I don't know if he's ever going to be a thing, guys. Like, he is just too drop prone. I think he's just kind of an unaware player. It seems like Rodgers basically has to hand deliver the ball right into his breadbasket for it to be caught. So, I think there's going to be pretty ample opportunity for Tonyan. We saw Rodgers sort of put the ball high in the air and let Tonyan go up and make plays last night. And, plus Jay Sternberger hasn't really been the factor in the passing game that we thought he was going to be. So I think there's ample opportunity here. I think he's almost like back end, tight end 1 for me at this point, rest of season. I'm pretty excited about him, actually.
So even with the bye week next week, because, again, we're talking about these crunches right now, you think his upside is that high that he's worth a pickup right now, even though you're basically not able to use him next week, correct?
I do, yeah. And if that can cut out a few fab dollars and make him a little cheaper, so much the better. Yeah,
no, I'm on board with you now. Yates, you view this differently, right? You're not viewing Tonyan as a long-term solution.
Yeah, I'm going to come down on the other side of this one. Looking at Robert Tonyan, he's done nothing up to this point to make me confident that he can repeat. Now, he looked great last night. I'm not going to deny that in the contested catch situations, but then one touchdown was him literally wide open in the back of the end zone. So I think that moving forward, if Adams comes back, the offense is going to run through him. I think that we could see Jamal Williams continue to be more involved. You said we were going to talk about that, Dan. Like, more involved as a receiver out of the backfield. Aaron Jones is going to continue to see more work. And this all hinges on Lazard being out. So I think it would be different for me if Green Bay didn't have their bye week this week. If that wasn't the case, then I would be saying, yeah, go pick up Robert Tonyan, because he's in this realm of a streaming tight end for me. Pat said he's a low-end tight end one for him rest of the season. I'm not there. I say that he is more in this streaming conversation. And so if he is a streaming tight end, then when you can't stream him this week, you have to hold on to him on your bench if you go out, and because he is going to be a hot waiver wire pickup. People are going to see 3 touchdowns, and they're going to spend up for Robert Tonyan. So I just think that if he is in this streaming conversation and you can't stream him next week, I'm willing to let someone else roll the dice with him on the potential range of outcomes with Adams coming back into the lineup. So I'm not there yet. I'm not willing to go all in. And I think that he definitely will move up my rest of the season rankings, but he's going to move into that realm of like Logan Thomas, Dalton Schultz, like in that realm of tight end 18 to 20, probably be where he lands.
Yeah, so interesting for me, because the way my process works is I do start updating my rest of season rankings on Monday. Then after we do the pod and we have, our live stream, then I do like a real close deep dive into it and really update it. Right now, Tonyan falls at 13 for me rest of season. So I'm falling more with Pat. Oddly enough, Dalton Schultz is 12th. So, he is in that range, but I've moved them both up just because, assuming that Schultz isn't actually injured, I know he got a little banged up there at the end of the game. Those are guys at this point, given the injuries to Noah Fant, and that's part of sort of what I factor in. Doesn't sound like Jared Cook. There's no, he didn't practice at all this week, so he'll probably be out again. Guys like that, yeah, I'm willing to buy into this, even on a bye week. So let's move on, though, very quickly to the running back situation. I mean, Aaron Jones did score a touchdown. He looks good, but he did lose a lot of snaps here to Jamal Williams. Are you concerned about that at all, Pat?
Not really. I mean, we know that they wanted to use multiple backs here. We even saw A.J. Dillon get a series last night. So it just happened to be a pretty good night for Williams at the expense of Jones, but I don't think it's really a long-term concern. I think, especially with the firepower shortage they have at wide receiver, that there's going to be enough for 2 running backs to eat. So, Jones is still a top 10 back for me, but I guess the bigger news is Williams maybe becoming a more interesting potential pickup with this sort of usage. I mean, we sort of knew that was going to be the case, but they're more actively trying to get him the ball in the passing game than I was expecting. So that's sort of the pleasant surprise for me. And, that might give Williams some low-level value, especially with the bye weeks hitting.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the Falcons, though, because, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here with the Falcons before we get into all the trades. You've got Julio Jones, who re-injures his hamstring. You have to assume he's going to miss some time. Meanwhile, Calvin Ridley, I don't know what happened. 5 targets, no catches. Olamide Zaccheaus, 9 targets, 8 catches, 86 yards. Yates, I mean, tell me about the Falcons right now. What's happening? How are we viewing the situation going forward?
Dude, I don't freaking know. I just needed, in 2 leagues, I needed Calvin Ridley to get 2 points for me to win. And that didn't happen last night. So, no, moving forward, I think, so it's actually crazy. I tweeted this out earlier today that Matt Ryan, over the weeks 3 and 4, is the quarterback 26, and he's being outscored by guys like Dwayne Haskins, Sam Darnold, Nick Foles, and Nick Mullins. He has just not looked good. I don't know what the issue was last night. He did not look like Matt Ryan that we've come to know and appreciate. And so I just don't know what this offense is. I wouldn't be surprised. We're recording this, early in the morning. I would not be surprised if we see that Dan Quinn has been let go. This is just not in the next, 24 to 48 hours. This is just not a solid roster at this point and well-coached team. They obviously have allowed 2 massive comebacks, and it's just not looking good. And I just don't think the offense has a spark at all. So Calvin Ridley, he came pretty close to hauling in a couple of big catches there. So, and he did come into this game questionable, a little bit hobbled. So moving forward, I'm not concerned about Calvin Ridley. Julio Jones, I am expecting him to miss some time. Olamide Zaccheaus, he can be a fine flex option for you. I'm not trusting him as anything more than that. Hayden Hurst is still presenting a solid floor. Todd Gurley looked bad like just did not look explosive, but yet still found the end zone 2 times. So we've talked about it, Dan, like every single week, I think Todd Gurley is just going to fall at RB23 or RB24 in my weekly rankings because the potential range of outcomes is drastic with how he's looking versus the opportunity that he has. So, man, it's a mess right now. And I just don't know if they're still going to be throwing the ball a ton, but Matt Ryan has to be able to connect with these receivers for the fantasy points to go up on the board.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to assume that Jones is going to miss some time here. They get Carolina, then Minnesota, then Detroit, and Carolina again. So, Pat, anything you want to say about the Falcons? The world is your oyster. I mean, yesterday was kind of shocking. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think Yates summarized it pretty well. I don't really have too much to add to that, but I think we should acknowledge what an absolute Waterloo that game was for anyone who plowed ahead with using Julio Jones or Calvin Ridley. As Yates knows the hard way. And obviously, Dan and Kyle, the three of us had to decide how to handle those guys in our rankings. And I don't know about you, but I was guilty of injury optimism and forged.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah,
oh, yes.
I forged ahead a little too boldly with those guys. And I think Julio was the only guy I was maybe a little bit below consensus on. But, man, anyone who just went ahead and use those guys. And I do wonder if Ridley is hurt because, I mean, Jair Alexander, who was on him for most of the snaps that I saw, where I could tell who was on Ridley. I mean, he's a good cornerback, certainly a top 20 guy in the NFL, but that's not exactly a skull and crossbones matchup where, you just stay away from the receiver no matter who it is. So I do wonder if Ridley is at 100% and if he might be limited in practice and set his fantasy managers up for another tricky decision in week 5.
Right. Well, thankfully, again, their upcoming schedule isn't that tough, and they're all domes for the next 3 games. So hopefully that will help. But let's get into some trade talk here, guys. One of the things we do, Pat, is teams, people who subscribe to Fantasy Pros, a lot of times they incorporate their teams and their leagues into our My Playbook feature. And so we can see the number of times players are traded within those leagues that are incorporated into My Playbook. So I'm able to have a tool here where I can see not only the players that have been traded the most over any span I want. And for now, I've picked just since Sunday. So Sunday to now, who are the players that are on the move the most? But I can see some of the players that they're traded for. So let's talk about a couple of guys who are most traded. The most traded player that has been incorporated into My Playbook for leagues that since Sunday is Ronald Jones. Now, this one's interesting to me. I struggle with how to rank him rest of season. Every time it's like very Godfather 3. Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. The egregious drops aside that he had this past week, 20 for 111 on the ground, 6 catches, 17 yards through the air. He's got a game coming up on Thursday. Leonard Fournette may be back. So if you are rostering Ronald Jones, Pat, what are you looking to do with him? Are you looking to try to sell high? Are you buying low if you don't roster him? How do you view him rest of season?
It's funny that he does pop up as the most traded player because I think we are going to have this wide range of viewpoints on him, which is always good because that creates a trade market. With people viewing him in a different sort of way, it's a little harder to work guys in when there's a solid consensus on a player's value. So I wonder how big the window is for him, and I don't like the fact that in a week when the window is still pretty wide open for him, they're going against a good Bears defense in a short week. So I guess I would be more inclined to sell, and I do kind of wonder if Keyshawn Vaughn, who was finally active and getting some touches and found the end zone, might be a bigger part of the game plan this week. If they... would either of you be really surprised if Keyshawn Vaughn passed up Ronald Jones in the depth chart over the next week or two?
Nope.
And then you've still got Fournette coming back. So I don't know, guys. I mean, I guess he did look pretty good as a runner. As you mentioned, Dan, did not look so good as a pass catcher.
Nope.
And I know that was kind of a frustrating thing for Bruce Arians. He talked about that in the offseason, just not getting the sort of passing game production either as a receiver or a blocker that he wanted from Ronald Jones. So I wonder if that might be Jones' eventual downfall in this offense.
Yates, I heard a mention of Keyshawn Vaughn, so I know your ears are ringing a little bit. Go ahead. Talk about how do you view Ronald Jones here?
It was really interesting going up into, all off season before we hit training camp. That was the big divide with Tags and I. That was kind of just a running thing on the podcast, was that he was Ronald Jones, I was Keyshawn Vaughn. I actually had Keyshawn Vaughn up in my top 20 running backs doing projections because I just thought that he was the more talented back between Ronald Jones. He's not as much of a liability in the receiving game, and I think I can confidently say after last week that he is, Ronald Jones is an absolute liability in the receiving game. There was one that I don't know how Tom Brady could gift this pass any easier to Ronald Jones. He bobbles it, it falls down, and the camera cuts to Tom Brady's face. And you can just see, he's done. He's not throwing to Jones anymore. You can just read the body language there. So you do see Keyshawn Vaughn factor in the receiving game, find the end zone. I was a big fan of Keyshawn Vaughn coming out of college. And so I think that what you said, Pat, would we be surprised if he climbs the depth chart? I wouldn't be. Leonard Fournette, a non-participant in practice on Monday. I'm not expecting him to be back this week on a short week, maybe if it was a Sunday game. So I think there's an absolute path here for Keyshawn Vaughn to see significant touches on Thursday. And I think that the majority of those touches are going to come as a receiver, as a complement to Ronald Jones. Because again, you look at the numbers on the ground, it's a great performance. It's a great day against a good defense. So I just think that moving forward, Ronald Jones, if you can sell for it all depends on who you're going to be able to get, right? But if you can sell for a top-notch player, a top-tier player that doesn't come with these kind of question marks, then I think you absolutely should.
So let me give you a couple of names here that I've seen swapped for him directly. Again, I just looked at a bunch of trades that have gone down, and a couple names kept popping up. In one-for-ones, I never love the one-for-one running back. I will give you my running back for your running back because it freaks me out. But either way, fantasy managers do this a lot. So I guess let me ask you here, Pat, one-on-one swap, would you prefer Ronald Jones or Le'Veon Bell?
Le'Veon Bell at this point. I think Sam Darnold, there's passing game opportunity for Bell right now. They're just so short on viable pass catchers. I think this is a good time to maybe get Bell pretty cheaply in a deal.
Yeah, I think if you can, because I think he's going to be back this week, and Sam Darnold may not play, but probably doesn't matter. How about you, Yates? Would you take Le'Veon Bell or Ronald Jones?
Neither. No, I think
you have to. That's not an answer. Go
Le'Veon
ahead.
Bell would probably be my answer as well, looking at the opportunity in the receiving game.
Yep. No, I agree. Look, the Tampa Bay backfield is just not a market I want to dabble in right now, no matter what, because I'm just never going to feel comfortable. For a receiver, I know what Yates' answer is going to be here, but the guy who popped up the most in trading for Ronald Jones in the one-on-one swap was Robbie Anderson. So what do you think, Pat? Robbie Anderson or Ronald Jones?
Oh, Robbie in a heartbeat.
Yes. And Yates, I assume you agree?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, this strikes me most likely as people who are just devastated at running back and needed somebody to fill in and are thinking that they're quote-unquote selling high on Robbie Anderson, but I don't really think you're selling high at this point. Final one that I saw this one at least 3 times, which is very odd to see a 2-for-1 multiple times. Ronald Jones plus Keenan Allen for Tyler Lockett. Now, I know obviously all trades are need dependent, but just in a vacuum, Pat, Ronald Jones and Keenan Allen for Tyler Lockett.
Interesting. That's pretty fair. Keenan Allen's value is sort of elevated too with the situation they have, and now that we're seeing that Justin Herbert isn't a bad quarterback at all. So, boy, that one's pretty fair. I think I would almost rather have the Allen-Jones side. It's close, though. Wow.
How about you, Yates?
Yeah, I completely agree with Pat. That's super close. That's probably like a 51% to 49% split. I feel like that's a really, really fair trade depending on need. So I would probably be going with the proven, the running back asset, especially when you factor in that most teams probably need running back depth. But again, talk about super, super close.
All right, if you were the multiple managers who have made that trade, well done. Fair trade. We all approve either side you're getting. Let's go to Kenny Golladay. Guys, he's another one of the most traded players right now. He's only played in 2 games this season. His average essentially is 5 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown. He's been fine, but I think people are a little annoyed, I guess, at the Lions. I don't really know. What are your thoughts right now?
What else is new?
What else is new is right. Pat, how do you feel about Golladay here rest of season?
Still pretty good. I don't think my view of him has fundamentally changed, and I had him at wide receiver 6 or 7. Maybe I'm not quite that high. If I did rest of season rankings today, I might put him at wide receiver 10, but I do still think he is a wide receiver 1, like on that tier.
How about you, Yates? Do you agree with that?
Completely agree. He's a low-end wide receiver 1 for me moving forward.
All right, so my guess then is I know how you guys are going to say, because he's not being valued really, I don't think, as that way. But let me ask you, Golladay, the names that I've seen, and I hate the 1-for-1 in the same position. Doesn't make sense to me. But Golladay for DJ Chark, Pat.
I like Chark, but still Golladay.
Yeah, Golladay there. How about you, Yates?
Same here.
Yep. How about Golladay for James Robinson? That's another one that's been popping up a lot. Pat.
Wow, that would be a really interesting deal. Almost with the positional value, I would lean slightly towards Robinson right now, just because a back getting the volume that he has been getting, both as a runner and a pass catcher, even though it's not on the best team and maybe it seems a little fragile, but I still think that might be a little more valuable than Golladay right now.
Yeah, and I do the trade chart every week. I'm going to write it again after I do my rest of season rankings. Tonight I'll write the trade chart article. And some people were asking me, because I do have, the top 12, top 13, top 14 running backs worth basically the top wide receivers, because I do think that when you can get that running back that's locked in volume, as Robinson is right now, it's just worth way more essentially than you're getting from a wide receiver. What do you think of that though, Yates? Golladay for James Robinson? Because again, that one actually is the one that popped a ton that I've seen going forward. I don't know exactly why.
Yeah, it's a super interesting trade. If you need the running back, then I'm fine making that move, and especially too when you factor in that most of these rosters most likely need a running back. So if you have the depth at wide receiver, and you most likely do, because Golladay, you were making plans for Golladay not playing the first couple weeks of the season. So if you can send away Golladay and you have some solid options at wide receiver, and you can get a proven, like a rock solid RB2 with RB1 upside in the matchups that, in plus matchups, then absolutely. I feel like that's a fair trade.
All right, let's go to one more guy who's on the move a lot, and I would really like to hear Pat's take on this, because Tags and I have talked about him a ton this year, both on the podcast and off, and it's Jonathan Taylor. I mean, his, yards per carry over the last 2 games is fine, but he does not look great. We both talked about it. You'll see the occasional run that he pops off where he bounces to the outside, but half the time it legitimately just looks like he's just plowing into the line, and maybe it's because they've been playing from ahead. He's ceding touches to Jordan Wilkins and to Nyheim Hines. So how do you view Jonathan Taylor, a guy who, when Marlon Mack went down, a lot of people were just like, boom, top 5, myself included, top 5, top 6 back. So how do you view him rest of season?
Yeah, let me offer my theory on that plowing straight ahead thing. I mean, if you watch Taylor at Wisconsin, you know that he has the moves and the breakaway ability, his footwork, just the ability to throw guys off balance at the second level for a split second and then run right by them. I do think the big plays are going to come. I think right now he's so obsessed with not fumbling because he was perceived to have this fumbling problem coming out of school. Although if you kind of look at the massive numbers of carries that he had, the fumbling rate wasn't that out of line with the average running back, I guess. But he's going into these, when he goes through the holes, he's got both hands on the ball.
Right.
And then he kind of keeps both hands on the ball when he gets to the second level, and it sort of almost inhibits him making any sort of move, and he's just kind of staying in that straight line. So I'm hoping that's going to change, that he starts to feel more comfortable and frets a little bit less about the fumbles and gets going. But I do still think it is a buy low opportunity for him. I have no idea what Frank Reich was doing with the play calling this past week. I mean, why he is continuing to waste early down carries on Nyheim Hines and even Jordan Wilkins, who was getting the ball on pretty much every snap he had. I mean, get into a rhythm with Taylor, set up the play action with Phillip Rivers. It seemed like Reich was just sort of obsessed with passing when he was expected to run and running when he was expected to pass in that game. Yeah. And he sort of game planned Taylor right out of things. And I don't know. I think that game is going to wind up looking like kind of an anomaly.
Okay.
By the time we get deeper into the season.
Yeah, that's a good, that is That's good. I want, I think that people who are rostering Taylor want to hear that because it scared the bejeebus out of everybody. It really was like, if this is what is going to happen, then Taylor is way less valuable than anybody thought he was going to be. But it sounds like you think it's more of a one-off. What do you think, Yates?
Yeah, I agree with Pat and that's a really interesting observation as far as the fumbling, potential concerns and all that. So I think moving forward, and ECR this week had him up at like RB5, and I was not there. I had him as a low-end RB1 this week against Chicago. I just didn't see the opportunity there to return top 5 value this week. The usage of the other backs is concerning. It's frustrating. The play calling, I feel like there are several instances this season where we can look at these coaches and just be like, what are you doing from a play calling perspective? I mean, from Frank Reich to Cliff Kingsbury to Matt Nagy, just be like, what are you doing? You're being too cute. Like, just stop. Like, don't overthink it. And that's so frustrating as a fantasy manager. So with Jonathan Taylor, I think the value for him may be perceived a little bit lower because he was so hyped up this year. I'll call it the David Montgomery effect. And looking at, moving forward, I think he needs to just be viewed as a solid and steady low-end RB1 that brings potential, top 5 upside in plus matchups. But yeah, you can still view him as a solid low-end RB1.
So, it's interesting, guys. I kind of thought there might be buy low opportunities here for Jonathan Taylor, but again, it's a pretty small sample. It's essentially over the last 2 days, but the trades that were made for him are not buying low. He's been traded straight up. Again, hate the straight up, 1-for-1, same position, but for Josh Jacobs. So, I mean, is that just basically fair value? If you had to choose one, do you have a strong preference for one or the other, Pat, Jacobs or Taylor going forward, or basically 1A, 1B?
It's close, but admittedly, I think I'd rather have Jacobs right now. Really close, though.
Yeah, I agree. And Yates, you agree with that?
Yeah, same here. They're both in that same territory. Jacobs
What about...
Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Jacobs hasn't scored since week 1, so his value is lower than what it should be right now. That'll bounce back. He's gone up against some tough matchups. But, yeah, I feel like they're both solid low-end RB1s that are getting guaranteed volume, but they just haven't found the end zone recently or aren't super involved in the receiving game.
Another guy, and again, this is sort of wide receiver and totally fine with me, is Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill for Jonathan Taylor. You fine with that one, Pat?
Yeah, you mentioned it, Dan, just the desperation some people have at running back, and it drives up the value of running backs relative to receivers. In a vacuum, I would certainly rather have Tyreek Hill, but I could understand if someone with a major gaping hole at running back would make that deal.
How about you, Yates?
Exact same. In a vacuum, I would rather have Tyreek Hill, but definitely understand the need to go get a low-end RB1.
All right, so let's go to some buy lows, sell highs. We've been talking about a couple of them, but let's everybody go around the table, the virtual table, and give one buy low, and then we can go to one sell high. So let's start with you, Pat. Who's your buy low, your favorite buy low right now?
All right, I'll say Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown right now. And I know that the managers who have Brown in some of my leagues are feeling pretty disgruntled, and it's largely driven by the fact that he has not scored a touchdown yet. But Brown has 26 targets so far in 4 games, a pretty healthy target share in an offense as run-heavy as Baltimore's, I think. And he's averaging 4 catches a game. And what I like is that he is averaging 15.1 yards per catch and 9.3 yards per target. Both of those numbers are up from last year. But, last year he did have 7 touchdown catches in 14 games. I think the scoring drought is going to end soon, and this is a pretty good time to target him. I think this is a good time to get him while people are sort of wavering in their belief on Marquise Brown.
Okay, let me name a couple of guys, Pat, and you tell me if you prefer Brown to them rest of season. We'll just go receiver, okay? Okay. Marquise Brown or Will Fuller?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yes, I really like it when I do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I like Fuller as sort of a buy low right now, so I would take Fuller, I guess.
Marquise Brown or John Brown?
Marquise
Brown or, in half PPR here, Jamison Crowder?
Oh, Marquise. I'm not a Jamison Crowder guy at all.
Well, then we have to end this podcast because I am Jamison Crowder is my brother. Okay, Marquise Brown, final one. Marquise Brown or Michael Gallup?
Oh, another close one. I would say Marquise.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, I don't really have a problem with any of that except Crowder, in which case we can't talk anymore. Okay, let's go to you, Yates. Buy low option. Who do you got?
Yeah, it's going to come with a caveat. I don't think that he's a true buy low in the sense that like he is struggling right now and that it's going to bounce back. This is a guy that I think that you can still buy low relative to where his value is going to be in a couple weeks. And that's T. Higgins, wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think it's about to be wheels up season for T. Higgins here in this offense. AJ Green is just, I'm done with AJ Green. I just think that he is not anything in this offense. Joe Burrow is now becoming enamored with targeting T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, and I think that Higgins has now taken over as the number 2 receiver in this offense. So if this offense is going to be as good as it is with Joe Burrow at quarterback, then I want to buy in. And if I can get T. Higgins now before he continues to explode, then I think that you should absolutely be looking at acquiring T. Higgins.
Well, first of all, I'm not really sure. I have no problem with Higgins as a buy. I'm not really sure he's a buy low because he's available on the waiver wire, number 1. And number 2, I feel like he's producing right now. So it's almost like a buy high. Like you are buying in to what he's doing. How do you view Higgins, Pat? Because we talked about him a little bit yesterday on the waiver wire show because he is widely available. How do you view Higgins going forward?
Yes, and Kyle and I talked about him on my podcast yesterday, and we are in lockstep agreement here. Like I also agree with him that AJ Green is dust, and I think AJ Green might be on pace for some sort of record in unrecognized targeted air yards. I think I just invented a stat.
I love it. Okay.
AJ Green again had, I think, close to 100 air yards, targeted air yards this past week, and again just converted almost nothing. And it's pretty cool seeing Higgins get this sort of usage now consistently. And Yates mentioned it yesterday that pretty much the week that the Bengals decided to make John Ross a healthy scratch was just the clear signal flare that it was T. Higgins season. And I love that he got a reverse early in that game. Like they're manufacturing touches for him. I'm excited too.
So out of curiosity, Yates, I mean, I'm not sure if you have your rest of season rankings up right now, but where do you have Higgins going forward right now?
Yeah, I have T. Higgins at wide receiver 40.
Yeah, okay. That's around where I have him, so I'm with you there. And what do you think, Pat? Does that sound roughly in the neighborhood where you'd have him?
It does, yeah. Sort of low-end wide receiver 3, high-end 4 territory, somewhere in the late 30s probably.
All right. We're all in agreement. My buy low is Zach Ertz. It's been bad.
It's been
for
real
everyone.
bad.
Real bad. I agree. And considering I'm like, everybody rush out and pick up Alshon Jeffrey this week, I don't know. Maybe I've got some sort of a blind spot over there for the Eagles. But look, as bad as it's been, and they have 2, tough matchups for the passing game coming up with Pittsburgh and Baltimore in the next 2 weeks. It gets a lot easier after that. Alshon Jeffrey is coming back. Deshaun Jackson, should come back. And again, the schedule does line up after the next 2 games. It strikes me, especially without Dallas Goedert, as, if for no other reason than against San Francisco, who's tough on tight ends, even with all their injuries, he played almost every single snap against the 49ers. And I get that they probably need him to block and stuff like that. But at this point, people are done. I mean, you just gauged the market. People are absolutely seemingly done with Zach Ertz. And I guess he's a buy low to me because I'm not ready to go there yet. I'm not valuing where he was preseason, and I wasn't drafting him because I didn't think that was the spot to draft a tight end. But I think he's a guy whose rest of season value is going to greatly outperform what he's done right now. What do you think about that, Pat?
I do think you're right about this being the absolute nadir of his value right now. I mean, people are going to be so upset that, look at the way we were viewing the Eagles tight ends coming into the season. Like, right. Both of these guys have value, but if one were to get hurt, think of how the other guy would just smash. And we didn't get that. And again, the 49ers are, yes, a difficult tight end matchup. Although I'm not sure if Jaquiski Tartt played, and I know normally he is the tight end extinguisher for them. But, regardless, I do think that a lot of people who have Zach Ertz are going to be very, very down on him at this moment. So if you're, have a vacancy at tight end, I think this would be a good week to go out and try to get him.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about Robert Tonyan, who I like as a borderline tight end 1, but that's sort of where we are right now. The tight end options just they aren't uber reliable at this point, and I think given just the perception that I've got in the market from people who are rostering Zach Ertz is a good time to swoop in and try to get him because I think you can get him really, really cheap. Let's go to sell high here. Pat, who's your sell high candidate?
All right, I swear I'm not just bagging on Yates here for, stepping all over my Robert Tonyan take, but I'm going to say Jonnu Smith.
Yes.
And so the people right now who have Kelsey, Kittle, Mark Andrews, Darren Waller, like those guys are content at tight end. And I think, the Jonnu people are pretty happy too. Everyone else is probably looking to upgrade, including those Zach Ertz owners. And Jonnu's fourth in tight end scoring right now, even coming off the bye. But we know A.J. Brown is on his way back. We know Jonnu's had some decent touchdown fortune relative to the number of receptions. We know the Titans generally don't throw very much. And over the next 6 weeks, he faces the Steelers, the Bears, the Ravens, and the Colts twice. So 5 pretty tricky matchups in the next 6 weeks. I do like your guy, Yates, but I think it might be a good time to go to the casino window and cash in the chips.
How you doing, Yates? You okay over there?
No, I'm fine because I agree. I mean, if you can get, I love Jonnu, right? And I have him everywhere. Pat and I were joking around, like, I don't know if there's an analyst and player that is more synonymous this year than myself with Jonnu Smith. But, like, looking at Jonnu, if you can turn him into one of these top tier locked and loaded options, like Mark Andrews, I don't think this is the right time to go and trade Jonnu Smith for Mark Andrews because I don't think that's going to happen after he scored 2 touchdowns. But if you could turn Jonnu Smith into Mark Andrews, I'm totally fine with that. Like, I had Jonnu Smith at 7 in my draft rankings, but I had Mark Andrews as a top 3 option. It was a locked and loaded. Like, yeah, you trust him. So I think that if you can always turn these assets and you can turn them around into these locked and loaded guarantees at the position, then absolutely go for it.
Pat, Jonnu Smith or Zach Ertz rest of season?
I have to go Ertz.
Yeah, and I think that's a trade you can make. I think that's a trade you can make if you have Smith. Again, the 1-for-1 trades, I don't like it.
That's
the one thing
I'm gonna chime in there. That's the line.
Yeah.
That I'm not going there. I have
Okay.
I plummeted Zach Ertz down my rest of season rankings. I agree.
So you don't agree. You don't agree at all as a buy low.
No, I don't. I think
good thing I skipped you.
It's
Sorry.
relative. It's relative. If you can get him for dirt cheap, then sure, do that. I mean, people are dropping Zach Ertz everywhere. So, like,
Yeah.
I think that if you can scoop him up off of waivers, sure, absolutely do that. But yet, I don't think that you can go out and confidently looking at what Zach Ertz has done this season and trade away Jonnu Smith who is, just his value is sky high right now. I think that would be overselling.
So the one thing that I will say, and this is something that I don't think fantasy managers pay enough attention to when they're thinking about trades and when they are thinking about the rest of season rankings. Bye weeks play a big deal with it, and Jonnu is now somehow, surprisingly, past his bye week.
Right.
So if everything goes well, his bye week is done. Every other player that you're thinking about trading for, except on the Steelers, still has their bye week upcoming. And that does make a difference when you value rest of season rankings, because that is a week that you're not going to have to worry about finding a replacement. But I do like the Jonnu Smith call as a sell high for pretty much the reasons that you said, also because it goes against whatever Yates wants.
I knew you were going to include
Yates.
that. I knew you were going to, as you were
have to.
talking, I was like, there's going to be a dig at me. It's coming right in here.
There's always,
Yep.
people sometimes comment, by the way, Yates, of I'm like the guy who just insults people and thinks it's funny, but it just makes them angry. I'm really sorry. It's just my natural way. Yates, go ahead. Sell high. Who do you got?
I had someone, and then I got derailed talking about Jonnu Smith. I got distracted.
Do you want me to go, and you want a minute to
No,
find
I'm
your
going to
guy?
go with Mike Evans. Mike Evans, looking at his opportunity here in the offense without Chris Godwin, he's produced, and I'm not going to deny that. He's absolutely produced with his opportunity. He's been consistent. He's scored multiple times this season, but they've been weird, like 2-yard touchdowns. But last week was a great game and a tough matchup. Looking forward, Chris Godwin, not expected to be out super, super long. So I think that you can still rely on Mike Evans in his absence as a back-end, wide receiver 1. But I just feel like he's going to lose his upside as soon as Chris Godwin comes back into the lineup fully healthy. So if you can turn Mike Evans into one of these main options here towards the top, like I think Michael Thomas is going to come back this week. If you can turn Mike Evans into Michael Thomas, I would personally be up for making that move.
What do you think, Pat? Do you think that Evans is a sell high candidate?
I think he is, definitely. And I know one of the concerns for me would be that at least one of the Twitter docs I follow suggested that maybe the injury, the re-injury for Evans, and he came back and played, so maybe not, but it looked like the mechanism for a high ankle sprain. So obviously if we get news about that, that is going to change the calculus big time here. But, generally I would agree with Yates on that. Just a matter of health, though.
Yeah, I was going to mention that it did look like he was kind of fighting, and kudos to him because he's tough, but it did look like he's fighting through that ankle sprain. And again, it's a short turnaround this week, so, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. So maybe if you can get that done immediately, that's not a bad idea. For me, it's Mike Davis, and, I get that everybody understands that this is not a long-term thing going on for Mike Davis, or at least that's what they're going into. But I have seen rumblings out there about, hey, there were these talks about how Matt Rule wanted to, at least somewhat kind of limit a little bit the crazy amount of touches that McCaffrey got. And given how great Mike Davis has looked, he is somebody who I think could factor in. I mean, this is what people are saying out there. I don't necessarily know if that's true, as good as Mike Davis has looked. I mean, it's Christian McCaffrey. He has a good game coming up against Atlanta. But right now, I think running backs, especially for the short term, that can get you through some of these injuries are worth a ton. And I think that especially if you find a fantasy manager, I mean, I've got, legitimately somebody was starting P. Ryan, last week in a league. There aren't that many running backs out there to go around. So I think if you can, I don't really expect him second half of the season to have major impact. So I think if you can sell high to a running back needy team right now, I would go ahead and do it. What do you think, Pat?
Oh, yeah. And Teddy Bridgewater checks down his running backs so often. Like, I think I underestimated that coming into the season. And, obviously that was baked into CMC's value as the number one overall pick by broad consensus. But it is really uplifting Davis's value too. And I think I've got him at like running back 8 or something for week 5. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, I agree. And you too, Yates, you're good with that?
Yeah, if you can turn that into a valuable season-long asset, I don't know what exactly you're going to be able to get. That's going to vary league to league. But I think if you can turn that into something, then absolutely go for it.
There's almost certainly a fantasy manager in your league that's staring at a 1-3 record and desperately needs a win and is willing to forgo long-term value to get a top 12 running back this week. And if you can, you can maximize Davis's value, I certainly would go out and get it. All right, let's talk about a couple of rest of season risers. We've probably mentioned a couple of guys and fallers, but let's start with running back. Pat, who's a guy who's risen up your rest of season rankings this week?
He already would have been pretty high, but Chris Carson, I mean, this guy is just superhuman. The Cowboys defensive tackle who basically tried to twist his knee off in week 3, and then he comes out this week and has 16 carries, 3 catches, 100 yards from scrimmage, a couple of touchdowns. Just pretty amazing. And now he's up to, I think, running back 5 overall in half-point PPR leagues. So, and it's funny. People were rushing to the waiver wire last week to get Carlos Hyde to use him in week 5, and it turns out Hyde misses the game. And
that was so frustrating.
Crushes.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, there were worries that maybe, I don't know, other backs would cut into his workload. Seattle's throwing more now. Even with the increased passing volume for the Seahawks, like Carson is pretty immensely valuable, and I've kind of adjusted and realized that he is like a mid-range running back 1.
Oh, you have him that high, in your top 8 or 9?
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I would say so. I mean, maybe just right behind Jonathan Taylor, around 8.
That's exactly where I've got him. I've got Taylor at 11 and Carson at 12.
Okay. All right. I like it. Yeah, I we do this consensus waiver wire article every Monday where we give our waiver wire rankings, we recommend fab bids, we talk about a couple of questions. One of the questions is, who's the toughest for you to rank this week for a waiver wire pickup? And for me, it was Hyde. And I was like, because Hyde could be a huge pickup. He could be a guy who's going to win you the week if Carson misses time, as he's expected to miss time, or he could be I didn't expect him to miss the game, but he could be completely without value. And I didn't really, you try to guess essentially which way it's going to go. And it went poorly for Hyde and well for Carson. How about you, Yates? Who's a running back riser rest of season?
It's got to be Joe Mixon. And it's mostly just because I had hedged my bets here with Mixon. I had dropped him down to 15 in season-long rankings, so I was still viewing him as a high-end RB2, but yet he has now moved confidently back up into my top 10, a player that I'm all in on again. And the main reason here is not because I'm chasing after the 3 touchdowns, and he looked great. He's always looked great as far as on the field. It's just been converting it into touchdowns. But here's the thing that makes me confident putting Joe Mixon back up into my top 10. He saw 6 targets last game. Giovanni Bernard, 0 targets. That is the big thing here, where we are now looking at Zach Taylor finally wising up and saying, oh, what does it look like if I give my best running back the opportunity in the receiving game and actually get Giovanni Bernard off the field? So moving forward, I'm all back in. I'm all in again, with Joe Mixon here. So yeah, he's risen back up my rankings.
2 things. One is legitimately 15 to 10 was exactly where I had him as well from last week to this week. But I will say my one worry on it is as much as that seemed to work, I don't think they're going to have this game script every single week. And as much as he factored into the passing game, hopefully that's wow, look, he can really do well in the passing game, which you should know already. I do worry a little bit when they inevitably fall behind going forward against Baltimore, against Indianapolis, and everything like that. Let's get to a faller, though, here. Pat, who's a faller for you rest of season?
I guess it's David Montgomery, right around the time I hoped he would be a riser following the Tariq Cohen season-ending injury. But, he's 25th in half-point PPR scoring, and I realize the 0 touchdowns are a big driver of that. But the Bears right now, I checked this on Football Outsiders, their run blocking. They're ranked 7th in adjusted line yards, the Football Outsiders run blocking metric. And yet Montgomery just is not picking up yards consistently. There are no chunk plays. I thought maybe there would be a passing game dividend, and I guess we did see him get 6 targets and a couple of catches this past week. But, the return is just so lacking for what should be really kind of a wheels-up situation for him. So I'm just finding it hard to be confident in him, even though he might get sort of a dead cat bounce on the touchdown fortune. But, I'm just not optimistic here.
Yeah, and then, of course, a rough matchup coming up right now this Thursday against the Bucs. How about you, Yates? Who's a running back faller for you?
Yeah, Darrell Henderson has to be talked about here.
Sure.
Looking at, I put out on Twitter, I was like, was there a player that we as an industry missed more on this past week than Darrell Henderson? Like, everyone was like, here we go. This is going to be a massive performance. And then Sean McVay was like, psych. So I'm looking at Darrell Henderson. The big thing here, too, is that you now have Cam Akers coming back, reportedly coming back into the lineup in Week 5. So Henderson had the opportunity in this game to complete, if he got the majority of the touches, which he just didn't, if he got the majority of the touches and performed well, to solidify and lock down this backfield, to be able to say, I am the main option in here, I'm the hot hand moving forward, Sean McVay, give me the majority of the work. It didn't happen, and so now you're looking at, now this is just a messy backfield again. It's kind of in this situation that it was in Week 2, where we thought that, or after Week 1, where we were like, okay, well, there's, it's kind of just messy, where you have Malcolm Brown, Cam Akers going to see touches, Darrell Henderson. So now I just don't know what to do with this backfield. That drops Darrell Henderson down my rankings slightly.
So can you give me numbers roughly about where you had moved him? Because I agree. I'd been pretty aggressive with him because I really thought this was what you need to see the second game, and then you come back here and it's Brown from the beginning. So can you give me a rough number about where he was and where he went to in your rest of season rankings?
Yeah, for sure. He was at 23 and then dropped down to 28 for me. So it's not a significant drop. I still think he's going to be involved, but with how messy the running back situation is just in general, he does stay within my top 30, but he's not someone that you can rely on moving forward.
All right, Pat, let's get to a wide receiver riser here. Who's your guy?
We briefly touched on him before, Will Fuller. So he had that sort of hamstring scare that seems to be out of the way now. 6 of 7 targets he caught this past week for 108 yards and a touchdown, and could have been 2 touchdowns if he had managed to get both feet in on that effort to try to tie the game with the Vikings at the end. And he got that horrible Chiefs, Steelers, Ravens run out of the way. With that out of the way and the hamstring scare out of the way, and Brandon Cooks just inexplicably being a complete non-factor so far. I mean, Will Fuller is the alpha in this passing offense, and I think with a slate of easier matchups ahead, that's going to be worth something. So I think he is like a top 20 receiver, for top 25 at least.
Yeah.
Like wide receiver 21 or so.
Yeah, no problem whatsoever with that. He could have had a monstrous game this past weekend had he gotten that touchdown. Yates, wide receiver riser.
Amari Cooper going for me from like low end wide receiver 1. I've got him up at 5 now, guys. And this is based on the workload. He is now on pace for over 200 targets on the season. With how much Dak is throwing the ball, it is ridiculous the workload that Amari Cooper is seeing. He's always had the talent, but he's never gotten the like huge opportunity. That was one of the things that we were talking about in draft season, was like Amari Cooper going off the board as a top 10 option was a little ridiculous to me, because yes, he can always make up for it with touchdowns, but his week in and week out volatility, combined with the fact that he had never seen more than, I think it was 120 targets in his career. Like, if he saw 150 targets, then absolutely he can be a top 5 option. Now he's on pace for over 200 targets, and he's producing even with a potential, there are some rumblings that he's still dealing with this foot injury and issue. If he's putting these types of numbers up and the type of workload that he's seeing, all the week in and week out volatility is gone from Amari Cooper. So wheels up with Cooper in this offense with how much Dallas is throwing the ball.
Yeah, I'm 6th rest of the season. How about you, Pat, out of curiosity? Are you there where Amari Cooper is a mid-range wide receiver 1 at this point?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and we worried about what the usage was going to look like this year with CeeDee Lamb there, Michael Gallup there, and the targets have been great. And he's their short area guy, which is fine. Amari is good enough to do the catch and run thing and turn some short completions into big gains. So, he is just a week in, week out rock star right now.
All right, how about a wide receiver faller for you? Go ahead, Pat.
I would say Marvin Jones,
Yes.
a guy I think most people could probably safely drop right now.
Yep.
We thought he might get the value spike with Kenny Golladay out the first couple of weeks, and he had 2 barely passable games. I think a touchdown floated him in week 2 when he only had 23 yards. But there was no discernible volume increase. And now Galladay's been back for 2 weeks, and Jones has 5 targets in those 2 games. It's fewer than Danny Amendola, fewer than TJ Hawkinson, fewer than DeAndre Swift. And really the alarming thing is that his average depth of target is down under 10 this year. He was always thought of as sort of a vertical receiver. He's at 9.8 yards per target. That number was at 13 last year, 14.6 the year before. So, the usage here is just not good.
Yeah, he was the guy for me. I mean, especially with the bye week this week, he's certainly droppable. How about you, Yates?
It's DJ Moore for me. And it's not like DJ Moore was someone that I personally had up within my top 12, as early, or as recently as last week. He's just slowly been falling, but he's not the wide receiver 1 in this Carolina Panthers offense anymore. And it sucks to say it, but Teddy Bridgewater is locking onto Robbie Anderson. Now, I think he can bounce back, and as far as short term, I think he can have a fine week against Atlanta this week. But as far as moving forward, he's a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3.
Do you officially, Yates, have Robbie Anderson ahead of DJ Moore in your rest of season rankings?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
I do, actually. I have Robbie Anderson at 26, and I have DJ Moore at 28.
What about you, Pat? Who do you have higher between the two?
I would probably do the cowardly thing I always do when I'm genuinely confused about something like that and put them right next to each other. And I think I would probably have DJ Moore 1 spot ahead.
Yeah, that is exactly where I come out pretty much. Right now, again, I'm going to do a sweep tonight. I have DJ Moore at 24 and Robbie Anderson at 28, which is not a huge difference. And we'll see where I end up after I do a full sweep tonight. All right, guys, I'm going to make the executive decision because we're running a little late on time to skip our quarterback risers and tight end risers and fallers because frankly, I didn't have good names for them anyway. So let's go to our listener mailbag because we got a lot of questions. We'll go rapid fire here, okay? You don't even have to give analysis if you don't want. Let's start with you, Pat. From King. That's just his name. I don't know who he is. DJ Chark or Robbie Anderson rest of season?
DJ Chark.
How about you, Yates?
I'm going to go Chark there, but it's close.
From Jason Peck, DJ Chark or Robert Woods? Pat.
I will say Robert Woods. Close, though.
Good job, Jason Peck. Close call. All right, what do you got, Yates, for that one? DJ Chark or Robert Woods?
Yeah, I'm still going to go Woods here.
All right, let's go from D-Dub. Who do you prefer rest of season, half PPR, Miles Sanders or Kareem Hunt with the Nick Chubb injury?
so interesting because it's sustained value versus this big spike in the short term. I think I would go for the sustained value with Sanders.
How about you, Yates?
I'm going to go Hunt. With this Philly offense not looking great, I don't think the scoring opportunities are going to be there for Miles Sanders. Even though I believe that he's an extremely talented player and can produce, Hunt is just going to go nuclear in the next few weeks here.
Okay, from Ragtime, and I'm going to cut the question a little bit because he asked about Marvin Jones and rest of season value, and I'm not even going to ask Yates this because I know the answer. Ragtime asked, does T.Y. Hilton have any value going forward, Pat?
I'm going to say yes, he actually does. I don't think his value is completely in the tank because weird game script against the Jets where they were up early and, with like a pick six, like there was a whole quarter where they basically didn't have the ball. Like he's been just game scripted out of a couple of games. I do think he has some value, like, roster ball. I don't think you want to start him every week, but there's still a little bit of value. I guess he'd still be inside my top 40.
Yeah, that's basically where he's 39th for me. I'm still rostering him, but I'm not starting him any longer. I will not ask you, Yates. We're going to move on. Neil Slayton asks, Damien Harris or DeAndre Swift going forward? Who are you rostering?
I'll take Swift here.
How about you, Yates?
I'll take Swift too, but I'm not excited about either one of them.
Big Papa Nachos, great name, asks, would you trade DJ Moore for Deontay Johnson? Pat.
I would stick with DJ Moore. Not sure that's the right answer, but yeah, I think I'd rather have Moore.
How about you, Yates?
I'm going to go with Deontay Johnson there.
Okay, last question from Tailored Productions. What would you consider decent trade value for Drake at this point? Which I guess is much more of a, what's your view on Drake rest of season given his slow start, Pat?
I am hugely pessimistic right now. So even given the running back value, I mean, I would take like,
how about James Conner or Kenyon Drake?
Oh, I'd definitely rather have Conner.
James
I was
Robinson.
thinking like.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. James Robinson, yes, for sure.
Okay. All right, so you're way lower.
I was just going to suggest, like, I'd much rather have, like, Golladay. I think I might even rather have Odell Beckham than Drake. So, yeah, I'm worried about Drake big time.
How about you, Yates? You share with that?
Yeah, I'd take Conner over Drake. I have Conner at 14, and I have Drake at 16 in my rest of season rankings.
Yeah, I'm going to do Tags was sharing a couple of stats on Drake yesterday that are really eye-opening. We'll talk about that. Right now I have Drake at 15, but I'm definitely going to do a deep dive into what I've seen so far. All right, that's it. Pat, I'm so glad that we're finally able to talk. Just remind everybody where they can find all of you and your great work.
Oh, Dan and Kyle, this has been so much fun. You can find me and my rankings at thefootballgirl.com, and you can find me on Twitter at Fitz_FF. And if you Google Fitz on Fantasy Podcast, you will hear me talk to great guests like Kyle Yates every week.
By the way, I'm almost positive I forgot to mention that Pat is legitimately one of, if not the most accurate expert in our rankings for like the last billion years. So you should definitely take his advice. Sorry if I forgot to point that out right off the bat. Anyway, we're going to be back tomorrow, of course, with our Wednesday Start Sit episode. I will talk to you then.
Thank you for tuning into the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to tell us what you think in the comments section below. And while you're there, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.